Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hey guys, we are doing day 8 today on the 12 days of nutrients. We're going to talk about copper. I'm going to recap some of the things about micronutrients because I think it's important that we really internalize this, because so often we've looked at NPK, and we've missed some things. And reading from the Midwest Labs Agronomy Handbook, which I encourage you to get, download it for free, give them $10 and get it back and have them print it. Talking about the importance of micronutrients, they say cropland acres are frequently found deficient in one or more of the following micronutrients: boron, copper, manganese, iron, zinc, or moly. In many situations, a deficiency of certain micronutrients is the factor responsible for ineffective utilization of the major and secondary nutrients supplied in a fertilizer program or a liming program. Although only required in small amounts by the plants, their deficiency or toxicity can have just as much effect on crop production as any one of the major elements. There are a number of reasons that we've seen the growing importance in ensuring adequate levels of micronutrients in the soil, and they give 5. I'm going to share 2. 2 of the biggies are land leveling or land forming, where we've removed several inches of topsoil, and that will oftentimes make a deficiency in certain micronutrients in those cut areas. And the last one, high phosphorus levels. Anytime we have applied a lot of phosphorus, we have been found to find it to induce micronutrient deficiencies. Guys, as we have used a lot of NP and K, we have exacerbated the need for our micronutrients. And remember this, it is important to apply micronutrients early. A high percentage of the micronutrient requirements taken up during the first 1/3 of the growing period. Therefore, it's important to apply these micronutrients at planting in order to get maximum utilization. And if not at planting, and they're going to talk about here in a little bit why you might want to foliar feed them, but you do it early as you possibly can. Why would we be looking? Why do we have conditions conducive to deficiencies? Well, number one, we've had big crop yields, and we remove everything, not just NPK, but we take out zinc, sulfur, manganese, magnesium, iron, all of copper, all of the different nutrients, secondaries, macros, and micros. Naturally high pH soils, leaching from sandy soils, all lead to deficiencies. Additional high rates of phosphorus leads to deficiency. Soil compaction, cool, wet growing conditions, and tie up by the soil. And so we look at a lot of ways where the micronutrients are not adequate. Specifically, talking about copper here, it says that copper becomes less available as the pH increases. However, in soils with high organic matter, the availability of copper may be more closely associated with the organic matter content than with the pH. Soils high in organic matter, in other words, peaty, muck soils, maintain a very tight hold on copper, and availability is decreased. Crops frequently respond to copper applications on soils high in organic matter. Canadian studies have shown that in organic soils there is an interdependency between copper and manganese, as both elements are held similarly in complex form by the soil organic matter. Heavy copper application might result in manganese deficiency. In other words, too much of one hurts the other, or even just the right amount of one hurts the other. So a heavy copper application may create a manganese deficiency, while the addition of manganese can release copper from being complexed. And so there's a lot at play here, and sometimes we can fix our copper deficiency in these high organic soils by putting on manganese, because when we release that copper from being complexed, more is absorbed by the plant. Guys, there's a big relationship here that we need to study and we need to know. And here's what we believe. We believe that having, especially, I've looked at a lot of the soil tests. These guys have got organic matters of 6 or 7%. They've got CECs in the 30s, and they have the trifecta because they have a pH at 7.4, 7.6, 7.8, 8.2, 8.5. So now we've got everything. We've got high organic matter, high CEC, and we have high pH. all of those are working together to tie up manganese and copper especially. They tie up a lot of stuff, but especially manganese and copper. Obviously, they tie up phosphorus. That's why in that situation, we have a P1 test of maybe 10 and a P2 test of 70, 80, or 100. And so we have to row apply that fertilizer. We know that with these micronutrients, we have found it best to apply zinc in the trench, but we actually do not believe that we get a lot of bang for our buck when we come in and we apply manganese or copper in that seed trench, because we believe that high pH and that high organic matter and that high CEC literally rip the chelator apart, and therefore the copper or the manganese in particular become tied up in the soil. So what do? I wrote down one word here: high organic matter, foliar feed. Knowing that we need to have that on in the first third of that growing season of that plant, we definitely want to be in there at V3, foliar feeding those nutrients that we know we're deficient in. And we probably ought to be taking a tissue test and saying, do we need to hit this again at V5 if we're going to push this? Or what are we going to do to make sure that we circumvent this problem that we have? Guys, successful farming has a lot more to do with farming around the soil that we have than it does having the perfect soil. It's really hard to find the perfect soil. And we've got to bloom where we're planted. And so what do? We do the soil test, we do the tissue test, and we work around that and make what we have be successful and make it work. One page out of the fertilizer handbook, running over to page 101. When they're talking about copper here, they say copper is contained in several important enzymes in the plants, and it's involved in photosynthesis and chlorophyll formation. Cereal crops are more sensitive to low levels of available copper than most other crops. You wheat growers, this is worthy of paying attention to. It's important in everything, but we want to make sure that we are coming along here and meeting those needs. What are your copper deficiency systems according to these guys? In a small grain, it would be twisted leaves, yellowing along the margins with a tip burn. In corn, it's going to be the yellowing between the leaf veins. Annual applications are usually required on highly organic soils because copper may be tightly held in the soil as a copper organic matter complex. And guys, we believe that it's most successful to foliar feed, because I think that anything that you're going to get into that soil is immediately going to get tied up. They talk about the fact that synthetic chelates are generally 3 to 5 times as effective as inorganic sources. And natural organic complexes are somewhat less effective than synthetic chelates. Guys, this is making the case for the EDTA. If we're going to be successful here, we're going to have used some kind of a chelator in order to make this work. Our friends at the Western Fertilizer Handbook, which is a very old book, but the symptoms pages that they have in here are spot on. And so what do they have to say? How are we going to look at the copper thing? They're going to say it's an activator of other elements within the plant. It promotes the formation of vitamin A. It appears to have a regulating function when soil nitrogen is too high. Guys, here we are back again. We over-applied nitrogen. Now we've got to apply copper in order to do that. And they talk about the fact that an excess is very toxic. I am yet to see a copper toxicity in a plant. What do your symptoms look like? Well, they're going to have a bleached appearance, kind of a chlorotic condition, if you will. And that's kind of what you're looking at there, just to see that chlorosis of that plant. But guys, anytime we think we might have a problem, it behooves us to tissue test. Let's get that tissue test in. Let's get it sent and see what we need to do so that we can come out of this thing getting aggressive with solving those problems before they cost us a lot of yield. Neil talks about in his book, anytime there's a shortage of potassium, manganese, or copper, a weak stock will be the observed result. And high potassium ties up manganese, high nitrogen ties up copper. Guys, when we over-fertilize, we get ourselves in trouble. And copper is the first victim that we come to in regards to needing something because we use too much nitrogen. We want to make sure that those plants are healthy. We want them to stand. We need them to stay in place. And the copper is one of the 3 things that are big on that. Obviously, manganese and your potassium likewise is a deal, but when we put on too much potassium, then we hurt ourselves and create that shortage of manganese. We know that high calcium will tie up potassium. There's a problem with our high pH soils. And we come back here, we just want to make sure we're putting everything on in the right amount in the way that it's supposed to work. As we Go over here to the next thing that they have to say about this. Consider what happens if nitrogen is oversupplied. Zinc is instrumental in moisture absorption, therefore it takes more to do the same job, it takes more water to do the same job in corn production. And again, excessive amounts of nitrogen tie up copper. Copper confers stock strength to the plant. That is why the field that gets nitrogen in the proper amount will exhibit quite a different scene from one that gets too much nitrogen. In the last case, you can actually cut the stalk at the tassel near the ground and see the inside starting to disintegrate. By the time the plant is mature, there will be hardly anything left in the bottom of the stalks. And that, my friends, is not the recipe for being wildly successful in corn production. Following just after manganese on our test is reported the copper level. When it comes right down to it, information on whether or not a farmer should be trying to increase the copper level in his soils has become very confusing. For example, one Midwestern University Extension publication reads, the amount of copper available for plant growth is not adequately known since a reliable soil test for copper does not exist. Then the author goes on to recommend how much copper to use on particular crops anyway. Even though he doesn't understand the test, he's still saying he knows what you need. When it comes to micronutrient use, a lot of the same thing is still going on today. Guys, there is a test. Doing the right kind of extraction, that DTPA extraction, makes this work for us. I looked at a test today and they had DTPA extracted zinc, but they'd used the Malic 3 on the other micros. And I was very uncomfortable, and I told the grower that. I was like, I'm not comfortable to make recommendations, especially for copper and manganese on these, because I don't find them to be accurate. And so consequently, we've got to run the right test and then have the faith in it once we've found one that we know that works. Copper is a micronutrient that is needed in small amounts when compared to NPK, sulfur, and lime. And all of these nutrients are needed in adequate amounts before trying to increase production capabilities. Excessive zinc levels can lead to serious copper deficiencies. We see guys who have really high zinc levels for whatever reason, a myriad of reasons, but when they have that, then all of a sudden we're going to see a copper deficiency. Again, it's essential to chlorophyll formation. It's important in the reproductive stage of development, meaning better seed production. It increases the sugar content, and it contributes to both better color and flavor and helps increase the storage and shipping qualities. Copper will increase stock strength in combination with adequate potassium and manganese, which enables crops to withstand a higher rate of nitrogen without lodging. And in this regard, copper seems to increase the uptake efficiency of plants receiving the ammonium forms of nitrogen. Guys, it all fits together. We've talked about with nitrogen that it would be ideal to have a 50-50 mix of ammonium in and nitrate in, that would be our sweet spot. That would be what we want to do. We have talked about the fact that using too much nitrogen hurts us, and we're seeing that here again. And adequate copper helps us to be able to take in more of that ammonium in, which is our friend as we're starting to grow those big crops. Copper is also involved in building and converting amino acids to protein. It rarely ever occurs in significant enough amounts to be increased in the soil or the plant of usual fertilizers. If we're going to put it on, we've got to put copper on in order to get it in there. Copper chelate, somewhere between 2 and 7.5%, is a very effective source. However, applications as a foliar feed supply the present crop and only that year and will have no significant effect on copper levels for future crops. But when applied consistently over the years, it is possible to build the levels. If we just keep doing the right thing, guys. Life's easy. Figure out how it works and get on the right side of it. Applying these micronutrients, whether they be in the seed trench or foliar, with the exception of boron, which we would never ever put in the seed trench, but all the rest of them in the seed trench, unless we're in a high pH, high organic matter, high CEC, then we're going to foliar feed it. But putting it in the seed trench, foliar feeding it, and getting that residue back where we want it is great. Critical ranges, according to him, are anything below 2 parts per million means a deficiency. 5 parts per million is excellent, but 10 parts per million is not excessive. And we just don't see it above that unless we're running a Malic 3 test and we get some hinky numbers. However, reducing the DTPA extraction, we've not seen that. Again, too much nitrogen stops the uptake of copper, and the overuse of nitrogen can mean a copper deficiency on soils that appear to have everything that they need. He just keeps hitting on this overuse of nitrogen, guys. It just goes over and over and over. And we're trying to be judicious. Everybody's trying to figure out how to cut costs this year. And I'm not saying be a weirdo and go out here and use no nitrogen. That is not where I'm at. What I am saying is that we need to think about and have an objective conversation about, have we been using too much? Do we need to do some studying to see if we can reduce it? And I think perhaps most of us could say yes. He's talking about a farmer, and he said, well, in each case where he lost corn from lodging, the copper level was below 2 parts per million. And the lower that it was, the worse the corn went down. Copper gives resilience to a plant. Copper doesn't move in the soil. It is not mobile in the soil. So if you see a copper deficiency, sometimes it's like sulfur. It will show the deficiency in the youngest growth first. Adequate nitrogen gets you better copper uptake. Too much nitrogen means you actually decrease it. Guys, here we are again. Too much of one nutrient always comes as an expense of something else, and we don't want to do that. Proper usage is our friend. Want to touch just for a second here. We're going to hit again on doing the tissue testing correctly. Number one, don't pull the plants. When we jerk them and they pop up out of the ground, the dirt splatters up on them. So what do we want to do? When those plants are little, our friend is a pair of scissors. When our plants are bigger, we're just taking leaves. So that's a different story. After we get them cut off or the leaves pulled, the next thing we want to do is lightly rinse them using distilled water. Okay, not water from our pond, not water from our well, but distilled, because soil splashed on those plants, even just from rainfall or overhead irrigation or dusty conditions, can settle on the leaves. And if we don't send in clean plants, we don't get a good test. We want to make sure that we're getting a good amount of information here that's very valid, because invalid information leads to bad decisions, and we don't want to do that. Donald Schrieffer's book here in regards to copper. Copper has been almost totally ignored in general agriculture, yet it plays an extremely important role in the plant's reproductive stages and in photosynthesis. In the past, it has been used as a fungicide and was used extensively in orchards, with this practice excesses were more common. We have set the soil standards for copper between 2 and 3 parts. Now, he's using a lower number. Neil wants to see it around 5 and could be as high as 10. He's wanting to see it around 2, working towards 3. I think the bottom line is we need to be paying attention here and making sure that we're not having deficiencies, and we do that easy with a tissue test. He says that the chelates obviously would not be used in a broadcast application. We absolutely do not want you to broadcast chelated copper. That is not cost effective. It's going to spend a lot of money and get not much in return. However, if we have the right conditions, not a high pH, not high organic matter, and we need some copper, a chelate in the trench is great no matter what we're doing. The foliar feed side of it works very, very well, and we just want to encourage you to take a look at that. Copper is the key to the elasticity in a plant, as well as mold control. There's another thought for you, mold control. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, again, fighting disease, making our plants healthier, making us more money. You know, it's interesting because I see a lot of people talking about the fact that copper doesn't really have any benefit from a plant health standpoint. And yet when I start looking at some of the labels on the fungicides, there's copper in there. I have to pause and ask why that is, and I think it's worthy of your consideration. Guys, when we're talking about all of these things, one of the things that Arden talks about in his book that I just love is this example. Deficiency symptoms are the result of chain reaction of events that the current system doesn't take into account. If you have a rust spot on your car that has come through from the underneath, does it correct the rust problem to say there is a paint deficiency? Does it correct the problem to just paint over the spot? No. People who live in areas where large amounts of road salt are used realize that the paint can often hide a growing rust problem, but it does not correct it. And herein lies the major flaw of the single nutrient fix philosophy: quality. When that nutrient is added to the crop, did the health and the quality improve as well, or did we just hide the problem? And then he starts talking about all of the different things. You know, a lack of phosphorus leads to something else. A lack of too much nitrogen leads to a shortage of copper. Having the right amount of nitrogen makes copper work better. Having too much copper in a high pH soil is going to have us be manganese deficient possibly. having the right amount of manganese and a high pH. Soil is going to make us have the right amount of copper, probably. Guys, copper is a really, really important nutrient. They all are, but this is one of my favorites. I like boron, I like copper, I like reading and seeing what they do, because this copper product helps a lot in regards to plant health. It does a whole bunch of other things, but here's what I know. Where we're deficient in copper, we are deficient in plant health. We are deficient in standability. We are deficient in being able to fight off bugs, pests, molds, all of those different things. So my question is, why do we not want to address it? Maybe we should think about taking the money we've been spending on massive amounts of NPK and using those correctly, judiciously, according to the soil test, and taking some of that extra money and applying whatever micronutrients or secondary nutrients that we need. And maybe, just maybe, you can actually cut your input cost on a per acre basis and increase your yield. Guys, as we head off into 2025, I just want you to think about it. What would it be worth to you to be able to lower your input costs and increase your yield? If that has value to you, why don't you reach out to us? Send Karen a text at 641-919-5570. So guys, we thank you for tuning in. We're excited to get to share these with you. We're down to 4 days. We're going to get these wrapped up here in the very near future. And we really do hope you guys are having a better day.